For the Sake of My Children, a novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel narrates the life story of an Australian girl who fell in love with a Saudi boy. Then she converted to Islam, married her Arab lover, and traveled with him to the Islamic world. This book is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on a true love affair between a former Christian girl and a Muslim immigrant. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Therefore, any resemblance to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 38. The Mad Cow Gang in Canada. After returning from Australia, the brave woman Irshad decided not to confine her campaign against Islam to Toronto, but to start speaking in several Canadian cities. The Islamic Religious Council in Toronto took her to court, but its lawsuit was rejected by the judge of the criminal court. The Muslims' complaint against the resettled religiously persecuted refugee woman Irshad Al-Shamari was denied because it contradicts the freedom of speech that is granted by Canadian secular law. When the Muslims could not silence her through the law and threats, they began planning her assassination. She received emails from many Islamic terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other jihadist groups threatening to kill her if she continued to speak out against the Prophet Muhammad's misogynistic teachings and other terrorist tenets of Islam. She ignored her life-threatening emails and continued to expose the evils of the horrific Arab satanic cult that mistakenly calls Islam the religion of peace. When nothing frightens or silences her, a secret deal was hatched between Saudi Arabia and a gang in Canada. The gang was initially set up by some African immigrants living in Canada who were originally from South Sudan. The gang is called the Crazy Cow Gang or Mad Cow. It is the most dangerous and notorious gang in Western Canada. The gang at first was just like any other gangs, but when its leadership fell into the hands of some Muslim terrorists, it became the most egregious gang in North America. It defied Canada's law and police authority and overruled all other gangs. For the first time in human history, Muslim terrorists and gangsters are united. There is a lot that can be said about that Crazy Cow Gang, but the most important thing is that some of the converts to Islam joined the gang when they were in prison, and when they got out, they became the main leaders of the group. There is a rumor that the gang members have infiltrated the Canadian police, but whether this rumor is true or not is difficult to verify. During her short stay in a hotel after speaking in a Canadian city, the Mad Cow Gang managed to successfully plot the kidnapping and murder of the Australian woman Irshad. 3 gangsters entered the hotel and kidnapped her at gunpoint. Unfortunately, when these gangsters came, there were no armed security guards in that hotel to stop them from carrying out their kidnapping of the Australian woman. The only security man sitting in front of the main entrance of the hotel was not carrying a firearm and therefore could do nothing to prevent these dangerous armed men from executing the kidnapping plot. Some of the hotel staff stood helpless and begged for their lives when the gang members brandished their weapons in their faces. When the police arrived at the hotel, the gangsters were already gone with their kidnapped victim. The police interrogated the hotel staff in the hope of obtaining some clues that would lead them to the identities of the kidnappers, but all their inquiries were in vain. Even the surveillance cameras did not reveal anything about these daring kidnappers. The cameras showed that the 3 kidnappers wore masks to hide their faces. The hotel security guard and other staff members thought those guys were wearing coronavirus masks. The police concluded that the kidnappers were Muslim terrorists. The kidnapping of the Australian woman, Irshad Al-Shamari, took place in a large city called Winnipeg in Western Canada, which is the capital of the province of Manitoba. This is the last place on earth the Australian woman would have expected the hands of the Islamic terrorists to reach her. But it seems that Canada has become like the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Spain, Germany, and France, as Muslim terrorists have spread to every city and town. Many people consider the kidnapping of the Australian speaker Ershad the end of her life. Everyone concluded that her captors had already executed her. The city police did not leave any effort or stone unturned while searching for her murdered body. The police conclude, like everyone else, that terrorists may have indeed assassinated the kidnapped Australian, Ershad. The Islamic world rejoiced and celebrated in the streets the news of the kidnapping and assassination of what they called the enemy of Islam and Muslims, the hateful Australian woman, Ershad Al-Shamari. However, non-Muslim countries greeted the news with sadness and horror. Many journalists have concluded that Islam is like a mafia that no one can join, leave, or criticize without suffering physical annihilation. However, an RCMP officer raised some doubts about the Winnipeg City Police's previous finding where the kidnapping was committed. He suspected that the kidnappers were Islamic terrorists. He claimed that if the kidnappers were religious terrorists, why did they not assassinate the Australian Ershad in the same hotel? What is their motive for kidnapping her? They may demand millions of dollars to be paid for the release of their captive woman. These kidnappers knew that the U.S. government paid $50 million to Ershad to uncover the hideout of the notorious French terrorist Mohamed Nour El-Frenchaï. This new theory emerged after the police gave up hope of ever finding the body of the Australian Ershad. This conclusion redirected police attention to the possibility that a Canadian gang was behind the kidnapping. This new theory has an important question that needs to be answered before the police can drop the previous conclusion and focus on it, which is the reason for the possibility of a gang kidnapping the controversial Australian woman because of her talk about Islam and its prophet. The first evidence appeared when the police spotted the face of a notorious gangster in one of the surveillance cameras kept at the main entrance of the hotel. This man entered the hotel with two other suspicious men on the same day that the Australian Ershad was kidnapped at gunpoint. The police immediately connected the dots and concluded that the three gangsters had covered their faces with coronavirus masks after entering the hotel. The police conducted a thorough investigation of this suspected man. He was recently released after serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. During his stay in prison, the man was converted to Islam by some of the Muslim prisoners who are still in prison. This startling discovery has refuted the new theory and revived the earlier conclusion that the Australian woman, Ershad, had been kidnapped by Muslim terrorists. Therefore, the police started searching for that man. The police know that the man was a senior leader in the notorious gang, which was called the Mad Cow Gang. He was known as Nicholas Johnson before he converted to Islam. He is from a Christian background and was born into a Catholic Canadian family. After his conversion to Islam, he changed his name to Bilal Ahmed. Bilal has become a deeply religious man during the last 2 years in prison. He grew a long beard and began to recite the Holy Quran and pray regularly with fellow Muslims. Somehow Bilal's religious behavior convinced the prison authority that he had become a righteous man, and he was subsequently released on parole before completing half of his prison sentence. Shortly after his parole period ended, Bilal visited Saudi Arabia and performed Hajj rituals in the cities of Mecca and Medina. Upon his return to Canada, he brought with him a Somali girl who he said was his Muslim wife. Then the police arrested the Muslim man, Bilal, and interrogated him. At first, he denied having visited the hotel that day. However, when confronted with the video, which showed very clearly at what time and on what day he was spotted entering the hotel with the other two men, Bilal claimed that he had completely forgotten about his visit to a Somali relative to his beloved Somali wife, Halima Al-Saadia, who was in the hotel that day. The police were able to verify Bilal's claim when a Somali man was staying at the hotel on the same day as the kidnapping. The police allowed him to go home but kept him under surveillance. It happened that 2 days after the day some Muslim militants kidnapped the Australian Ershad, the police made a startling new discovery. Bilal's movements, contacts, telephone conversations, and email correspondence were carefully monitored by the RCMP after his interrogation and release. He sent an email from a public library to someone. Canadian police traced the recipient of this email to a computer in Saudi Arabia. In his letter, Bilal Ahmed informed the recipient that the boys are not ready to hand over the woman to him until he deposits their shares in the bank. The letter also included 2 bank accounts in Canada. The police identified the account holders as active members of the Mad Cow Gang. The police also told the Bank of Montreal to freeze any funds deposited that day into these 2 accounts. However, the police did not make any arrests until the money was deposited into those accounts. The amount deposited is $15 million in each account. However, under instructions from the Canadian RCMP, the bank did not show the funds in the 2 suspicious accounts. Once the police learned that the money had been transferred to the Bank of Montreal, they arrested Bilal Ahmed. At first, the police were unable to find the other 2 men. Bilal tried to deny his involvement in the kidnapping, but when confronted with evidence, he spoke up and revealed the entire plot from A to Z. Through it, the police were able to locate these 2 criminals. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police has surprised the 2 gang members at the First Nation Reserve in Manitoba Province. In a small house, the police found the kidnapped Australian, Irshad Al-Shamari, imprisoned in a deep hole. Since the day she was kidnapped from the hotel, she has been imprisoned by her captors in a remote reservation for First Nation people who were the Aboriginals of Canada and previously were known as Red Indians. Irshad was kept in the deep pit dug for her burial and final grave. Her kidnappers plan to bury her alive after they get their financial shares from the Saudis involved with them, who promise to pay them millions of dollars in exchange for killing the worst female enemy of Islam, the Australian, Irshad Al-Shamari. However, the kidnappers refused to kill the victim until the money was deposited into their accounts. Being an ex-gangster, Bilal understood that the kidnappers of the Mad Cow Gang would not tell him where they took and hid the Australian Irshad unless their shares in the terrorist plot were paid. To avoid running into the police again, Bilal did not contact his partner in crime in Saudi Arabia until he thought the Canadian police were no longer watching him. Therefore, he used a computer in a public library and sent an anonymous email to the Saudi sheikh who had recruited him for the kidnapping mission. Fortunately, the Canadian police rescued the kidnapped Australian Irshad, alive and well, from her kidnappers, who were about to kill her after receiving their shares of the money. It was breaking news for the entire world when the Winnipeg City Police announced that the Australian woman Irshad Al-Shamari had been rescued from her captors alive and unharmed by them. They did not even rape her despite her beauty and sexy naked body. They had stripped her of all her clothes, even her underwear and bra, before throwing her completely naked into the hole they had prepared for her grave inside and burying her alive. After the arrest of the other 2 men, Canadian police were able to unravel the entire plot with its roots in Saudi Arabia. First, the RCMP traced the account through which $30 million were transferred into the account of the kidnappers to a sheikh of the royal family in Saudi Arabia. The government of Saudi Arabia denied any role in the plot. The ambassador of that country said that the sheikh who paid the sum acted independently without the knowledge of any member of the royal family or Saudi police intelligence. This rogue Saudi sheikh is the so-called lone wolf who masterminded and planned the kidnapping of the Australian Irshad Al-Shamari alone. Despite this denial, the Saudi government refused to hand over the sheikh, the conspirator in the kidnapping and attempted murder of Irshad, to the Canadian government for trial. The ambassador said that he would be tried before a Saudi criminal court in the city of Riyadh. This situation created some tension between the 2 countries, Canada and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police has collected sufficient evidence indicating the involvement of some sheikhs of the royal family in Saudi Arabia in the kidnapping of the Australian widow Irshad Al-Shamari and plotting to assassinate her for what she said about their Islamic religion, their Quran, and their Prophet Muhammad. Despite this, the Saudi police denied any connection between these royal princes and the plot. The confessions of the Muslim terrorist Bilal Ahmed and other Canadian kidnappers active in the Mad Cow Gang revealed that the plot to kidnap and kill Irshad was hatched in the city of Mecca when Bilal went to perform the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. While performing Hajj, he became acquainted with some men who belonged to a Somali terrorist group known as Al-Shabaab. When these terrorists learned that Bilal was from Canada, they seized the excellent opportunity and convinced him to plan the assassination of the first enemy of Islam, the cursed Australian speaker. Irshad al-Shamari, who became an apostate Muslim woman after the martyrdom of her brave Saudi husband Mustafa in America in 9/11. The Somali terrorists gave Bilal a beautiful virgin Somali girl as his Muslim bride and then introduced him to a wealthy Saudi sheikh known as Prince Othman bin Zayden al-Tamimi al-Qurashi. This prince claimed to be a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and therefore his great-grandfather is the founder of Islam himself. Then this royal sheikh had linked Bilal with other sheikhs of the royal family. These sheikhs promised to pay $50 million to Bilal if he orchestrated and carried out the assassination of the controversial Australian spokesperson, Irshad al-Shamari. But Bilal was told that he would not be paid a single dollar until the apostate Muslima, who became an infidel Christian woman, had been kidnapped and killed. Bilal Ahmed accepted the secret deal and promised to assassinate the Australian woman, Irshad al-Shamari, the infidel Christian lady who always speaks blasphemy everywhere against Islam, the Holy Quran, and the infallible Prophet Muhammad. May God bless him and grant him peace. Once Bilal was back in Canada with his new Somali wife, Halima al-Saadia, he began looking for some gangsters to hire. He contacted some of his former Mad Cow Gang members and revealed the secret deal to them. But Bilal lied about the actual amount of the reward that the Saudi sheikhs of the royal family promised to pay him for the assassination of the Australian white woman, Irshad al-Shamari. He told the crazy Black Cow Gang members that the amount was $30 million and promised to pay it in full to the members of his gang if they succeeded in kidnapping and assassinating the white female devil who hates Islam more than she hates the smell of her dirty poop. Bilal decided to get $20 million and pay $30 million to the two men who agreed to join him in the kidnapping and assassination plot. Then the terrorist, Bilal Ahmed, used the name of his Somali Muslim wife, Halima al-Saadia, and opened an account in a bank in Switzerland. That done, he called the Saudi sheikhs and gave them his wife's account number and asked them to deposit $20 million into that account. However, the Saudi sheikhs insisted that they would not deposit a single dollar until the kidnapping and killing mission was successfully completed. When the kidnapping took place, the sheikhs demanded convincing evidence that the accursed infidel Christian woman was kidnapped and killed for her blasphemy against Islam, the religion of peace. They wanted to assassinate her because she always claimed that she was a Muslima and married a Saudi Muslim man named Mustafa al-Shamari, who, according to her false claim, participated in the attacks of September 11, 2001. The Muslim terrorist Bilal Ahmed was unable to provide such a proof of the kidnap assassination of the abducted woman Irshad to the royal sheikhs because his two other gangsters insisted that they would not kill their captured Australian victim until they were paid first. Moreover, they hid their captive woman in a deep hole on a remote Canadian First Nation reservation, thus keeping her out of the reach of their former gang mate Bilal Ahmed. Accordingly, Bilal tried to persuade the Saudi sheikhs to pay the money first if they wanted him to convince the members of the crazy Black Cow Gang to hand over the kidnapped Christian infidel woman and slaughter her with his knife as he slaughters a sheep. He promised that he would videotape the assassination of the damned woman and then send the video to the sheikhs. For some time, neither side was willing to compromise on its condition. On the one hand, the gangsters demanded that the Arab princes must pay their wages first and then hand over the victim to their colleague Bilal, while the Saudi sheikhs refused to pay until they had evidence of the murder of the abducted infidel woman. For some time, the Canadian Muslim terrorist Bilal Ahmed could not convince either side. Finally, the Saudi princes who belonged to the royal family of Ibn Saud agreed to pay $30 million to the two Canadian kidnappers first, and then to pay $20 million to the terrorist Bilal Ahmed after he sent evidence of the assassination. When the rich princes deposited the $30 million into the two bank accounts of the kidnappers, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, intervened just in time and rescued the kidnapped Australian Irshad al-Shamari from the assassination of the Muslim terrorist Bilal Ahmed and the dangerous Mad Cow Gang members. If the Bank of Montreal showed the $30 million in the accounts of the two members of the Canadian Mad Black Cow Gang, the Australian Irshad al-Shamari would have become another terrorist statistic. Fortunately, after the trial of the terrorist Muslim man, Bilal Ahmed, and the two members of the Mad Cow Gang, the Canadian Criminal Court in Winnipeg ruled that the victim, Irshad al-Shamari, must receive the $30 million that the rich Saudi sheikh deposited in the Bank of Montreal in exchange for her kidnapping and assassination. The judge of the Canadian Secular Court said while issuing the fair verdict that the money is compensation for the torture and physical violations that the Australian kidnapped victim, Irshad al-Shamari, went through during her abduction and imprisonment in a deep hole in the reservation of the First Nation of the Indigenous inhabitants of Canada, who were known in the past as the Red Indians, by two members of the Mad Cow Gang and their partners in crime, the Muslim terrorist Bilal Ahmed, and the Saudi sheikh, Othman bin Zayden al-Tamimi al-Qurashi. The huge compensation from the money that the Australian mother, Irshad al-Shamari, received from the Bank of Montreal assured her that God is always with her and that, as the Apostle Paul said in the Holy Bible, in his epistle to the believers of the Church of Rome. And we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Romans, chapter 8, verse 28. As for the three criminals, Bilal Ahmed and two of the Mad Cow Gang, they were sentenced to life imprisonment in a maximum security prison in Canada without the opportunity of parole for any of them. This is the third time that the brave Australian mother, Irshad al-Shamari, has received huge financial compensation for causing the arrest of dangerous Muslim terrorists. The first time, she got $50 million as a reward for discovering the hideout of the dangerous white foreign terrorist, Muhammad Nur al-Franzai, who was a senior leader of the Al-Qaeda and Taliban groups. The second time, she received $50,000 to help identify and arrest the terrorist leader, Mullah Sheikh Mohammed Abu Hamid, who disguised himself as the Imam of the Great Mosque in Kandahar and changed his name to Imam Omar Bismillah, or the Shit of Allah. The third time, she was compensated $30 million for kidnapping her and attempting to assassinate her in a cruel and inhuman way, and for the arrest of the Muslim terrorist Bilal Ahmed, who was known before his conversion to Islam in prison as Nicholas Johnson. Muslims all over the world became extremely outraged because they thought that the Australian apostate Muslim woman, Irshad al-Shamari, who hates Muslims and their religion of peace, would use these huge funds from the millions of US dollars that she obtained easily to write and publish books and videos of her speeches against the noble Quran and the blessed hadiths of the infallible messenger of God, the Prophet Muhammad, whom Allah has sent as mercy to mankind. She would do that for the purpose of promoting and spreading her hatred and lies against Islam, the religion of peace.